Thank you. I'm honored to be here today in Tel Aviv with you guys. There's something amazing when a small group of people come together to create something that does not yet exist. And you can definitely feel that energy here in Tel Aviv today. I'm from Silicon Valley, where things are equally electric right now. Everywhere you look, people are talking about startups and innovation. And what's less obvious than the startup energy coming from ecosystems like Silicon Valley and Tel Aviv is the energy that's coming from the walls and the boardrooms of the world's most powerful corporations. And for good reason. Technology has completely leveled the playing field of capitalism. And no organization, regardless of its strength, size, or scale, is protected. A group of hungry teenagers with some Red Bull can take you out. Everyone remembers Blockbuster, the world's largest video rental store. But what few people remember is that Blockbuster actually had the opportunity to buy Netflix for $50 million in the early 2000s. This failure to innovate caused Blockbuster to go bust, and Netflix is now a $33 billion company. Kodak, the company that invented the camera, they destroyed a 132-year legacy after their rightful denial of the digital camera. 132 years of innovation, they failed to innovate. If you compare the Fortune 500 today to the Fortune 500 in 1955, only 61 companies appear on both lists. In other words, over 90% of the Fortune 500 companies that existed just over 50 years ago are still around. The rest are gone. And we've all heard the folklore of corporate disruption and industry disruption. And while big companies know that startups are their new competition, no one has any clue what to do about it. My name is Matt Dorey, and I've been quietly working on what I consider to be one of the largest innovation experiments in history. I started programming at age 9, I left home at 17, and shortly after dropped out of high school to pursue my dream of revolutionizing the medical industry. At 18, I founded the first cloud-based practice management and digital X-ray company. And shortly thereafter, when I was 20, I raised $20 million in venture capital to fund it. I was well on my way to my naive interpretation of success. I remember getting that call that all of us entrepreneurs think about. Years later, sitting at my desk, the phone rang and I picked up the phone. It was an executive from a Fortune 500 company, one of our largest competitors, and they wanted to buy us. But it was nothing like I had imagined. I remember sitting around that table with our board of directors, discussing the pros and cons of the deal. And I was blown away by how quickly our board unanimously voted to sell the company. What struck me in that moment was that despite our outward mission to change an industry, our very structure that drove us suggested that our unconscious mission was actually just to grow the company and sell out. And that really hurt. A decade of blood, sweat, and tears just to sell out? I felt horrible. But worse than that, for the first time in my life, I felt like a complete failure. And what I realized was that even though I loved the company and I loved the work that we were doing and I loved the people, I couldn't dedicate my life to building something that had no purpose, even if it was the company that I started. And so I quit. And what was ironic about this was that shortly after I left, the deal actually fell through. And despite the company's success today, and despite nearly a decade of hard work, I was left with nothing. And this caused me to deeply question my own version of success. With no company, no obligations, and no cash, I found myself living in a Haitian refugee camp, of all places. And what struck me about being in Haiti was not the fact that there was extreme poverty or incredibly harsh living conditions, but the fact that despite having nothing, the Haitian people had everything. Their joy and their presence was like something I'd never experienced before, especially in business. And it was in that moment that I realized the initial seed of why I became an entrepreneur in the first place was gone. And so I traveled the world, and along the way, I met many great teachers. I spoke with hundreds of early-stage entrepreneurs, and I had the opportunity of sitting across from people that I previously only heard about in books and magazines. And what I learned through those discussions was the stark contrast between the entrepreneurs that were just getting started and the entrepreneurs that had actually made it. The entrepreneurs that were just getting started were full of conviction about where they were going to go and exactly how they were going to get there. And the entrepreneurs that had made it, they were reflective of their journey and suggested that the road to success for them was completely different than what they had originally imagined. In fact, in most cases, the product or the idea or the concept that took off was completely different than the entrepreneur's original plan. But if their success appeared almost random, if it had nothing to do with what they originally set out to do, what caused this group of people to make it? Was it luck? Was it finding the right VCs? Was it partnering with the right people? Was it building perfect technology? Was it market timing? And in all cases, it was none of these things. You see, the funny thing about starting a company is that if you study the most successful companies in the world, none of them started off with the original intention of ever becoming a company. Apple was a hobbyist project in Stephen Woz's garage. Google was Larry and Sergey's thesis project at Stanford. And Facebook was a side project in Mark Zuckerberg's dorm room while he was at Harvard. Conventional wisdom, and this is certainly how I started my last company, is that you begin the journey of entrepreneurship by starting a company. You go out and you find a large addressable market, and you try to find a customer with a pain point in that addressable market. And then you find people who are industry domain experts and industry veterans, investors who understand that world, and you get them together and you build against that product. And then once you're large enough, you take all of those people and you put them into an office environment. But what's deadly about this approach is that your culture, the very fabric of why you and your company exist, become a byproduct of a string of meaningless decisions. When you model the top companies in the world, they're actually built using the exact opposite approach. And this became my obsession in designing my next company. What if we started with no market, no product, no concept of what we were going to do, but just a set of cultural beliefs? What if we then took those beliefs and we encoded them in an environment? Could we then use that environment to attract some of the brightest and smartest people in the world, and then see what products came up? And then lastly, if something was interesting enough, and only at this particular point, maybe consider creating a company for it. And that's exactly what we did. This is an unmarked park in San Francisco, where we've built an underground 30,000 square foot innovation campus in the center of the city. It's called Factory, and our headquarters is the most historic building in the center of the city. It's a 30,000 square foot private residence where we've built everything that you need to realize any idea within hours. And we haven't just looked at it from the perspective of giving you tools and giving you support, but we wanted to think of what is the actual environment, what is the fabric that we wish to create that makes people more innovative. We have yoga and chefs and meditation and 3D printers and music studios, anything that you can imagine to become creative. And since we started, we've had the fortune of working with some of the top CEOs from some of the largest companies in the world, to executive teams, to Nobel Award-winning scientists, to some of the top makers and hackers and political activists and heads of government. And we've all gathered here with one central objective, That objective is to solve the problem of how problems are solved. Earlier, I talked about the largest innovation experiment in history. I want to tell you about some of the stats to back us up. In the past 24 months, we've worked on over 200 products with over 2,000 makers across 2.1 trillion in market cap companies to create an estimated $50 billion of potential market value. And what's maybe most fascinating about being at the intersection of big companies and small companies is the false dichotomy that exists between the two. Yes, small companies are fast and nimble, and big companies are slow and bureaucratic. But when it comes to innovation, over 90% of startups fail, and over 90% of big companies fail. When it comes to innovation, we're all equally terrible at it. So I want to share with you guys the 3 myths that we've learned, whether you're a startup or whether you're corporate, as it relates to being innovative. The first thing is the myth of process. There's nothing so prevalent right now as the idea of building an innovation process, or operating as a lean startup and building and iterating and building a lean startup, or whatever the case may be. But the reality is that innovation is not a process. It is an environment. So when you're thinking about how to be more innovative, consider creating the environment that you would like to be innovative in. The second is the myth of talent. Nowhere than in technology companies are we more obsessed with hiring the top creatives and the top designers and the top people to be in our companies. But the reality is that no great invention is ever built by one person. Instead of focusing on individual capability, far more important, we've learned, is team configuration. So consider the principles of how you'd like to work together. And the last thing is the myth of timing. This is nowhere more true than looking at a company like Apple, who's the last company to enter every single market they play in. How many times do you hear entrepreneurs and VCs saying, oh, the market's too early or the market's too late? Instead of focusing on market timing, focus on creating a purpose. That itself is timeless. And potentially the most powerful thing about innovation is not innovation itself, but is the power of choosing what's worth innovating. If you look throughout history, you can look at the distribution of power at any point in time by just looking at who owned the largest buildings. 500 years ago, they were churches. 100 years ago, they were government parliaments. And today, they're corporate headquarters. And the reality is while it feels exciting to be a part of a startup and a small band of pirates, 80 to 90% of the global economy is metabolized through big business. Earlier, I talked about the incredible failure rate of startups. While the startups that do succeed, success for 99.9% of them is just to be acquired by another large company. Only a small handful of companies actually go on to become a big company themselves. 2 dudes in a garage, start a company, build an app, raise money from the hottest VC, and sell it for $1 billion and get on the front cover of Fast Company. Really? Is that the current state of entrepreneurship? Is that why we put in the work that we put in? Because another $1 billion exit has 0 impact on humanity. If we truly want to have an impact, we have to start thinking about business differently. And our responsibility as entrepreneurs and innovators extends far beyond just creating great products and great companies. Our responsibility extends to changing the very fabric of business itself. If we continue to play the game that we've been given, and it's just about making money and building things and selling them and doing other things, we'll have failed to create the biggest opportunity that we can, which is to change the fabric of business itself. And so I want to leave you guys with a challenge, and that challenge is don't just consider your exit, but consider your legacy. Thank you.